Succeed by Sanjeev T. Lal. He is an entrepreneur, motivational and leadership speaker. As you may be aware, that this program is organized by the International Center Goa, which is an ideational institute organizing various programs such as lectures, workshops, seminars, and panel discussions that cover topics from youth to women rights, history, politics, and various other major issues that concern Goa, India, and the world at large. ICG has recently organized and hosted difficult dialogues in January and the Sur Jahan Peace Music Festival in February. That's just concluded last week. All ICG programs are open to general public, and for more information, we invite you all to visit our website, internationalcentergoa.com. Today, we are very glad to have an audience for the program today, and among our members and others who are present, we also are delighted to have, and we extend a warm welcome to the students of Business Administration from Don Bosco College, Panjim, and also the team and the employees from the Dristy Life Saving that are here today. A warm welcome to you and to one and all present. Before we begin today's session, we are extremely delighted to introduce today's speaker. Sanjeev Lal is a motivational and leadership speaker with diverse international work experience. He's a successful entrepreneur across several industries, the high point being the establishment of SAP consulting company in New Zealand, providing highly skilled international SAP consultants to Australasia, India, and expanded across the world. He is presently fulfilling his passion of renovating heritage Portuguese villas in Goa and the restoration of vintage World War II four-wheel drive jeeps in Ranchi. More recently, he has been the author of Rubies in My Years, a personal memoir charting his journey of overcoming adversity and obstacles to find success. The book is available on display, and if anyone would like to pick it up, it is available at a discounted price of 400 rupees at the desk when you are leaving. So could we all have a round of applause for our speaker for today? He's also a life member of the International Center Goa, and today's talk he will focus out of his own personal experiences on motivation. So I hand it over to Mr. Lal.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the introduction. And it's very nice having you all here. I can see some friends, long friends, and some new friends hopefully. My talk is going to be, as has been said, born out of my own personal experiences. It's going to be in two segments. It's going to be motivational and leadership. And I'm going to start with motivational and slowly go into the leadership area. Much lies broken in each and every one of us. And I say this again, much lies broken in each and every one of us, which brings us together. And it's the thoughts that we accumulate and which drive us forward, and the thoughts which activate us into doing whatever we do is what counts. Success to me has three ingredients, which has been written here, especially on that board there. Ingredient number one is thought. To do anything, you must think. And that thought will then take you forward. Because if you don't have the thought, there's nothing you can do. The other ingredient is you must have a desire to do something. The desire will get you forward. And the third ingredient, which is the most critical ingredient, is commitment. Commitment to see that desire through. 99.9% of the people fall through in the commitment area. They're not able to commit hard enough or press down and get that desire through, and that's where the success factor falters. If the commitment is there the success will come. There's no doubt about it. I will take you back to a scenario in the Harvard University, Harvard, Boston, Massachusetts, United States of America. This is, as you would all know, is the ultimate in universities in the world. There's nothing bigger than going to Harvard. So there we are having this get-together of old students in Harvard. And Harvard in any case is, you want to get the brilliant and the best students who go there. So here we have students who passed out 20 years ago, and some of them are now chief executive officers, some of them are chief information officers, some are presidents of companies, some are industrialists. And some guys are rolling up in a Mercedes, some guys are rolling up in a limousine, stretch limousine, one bigger than the other. So everyone is acknowledging them. And then along comes the whirring of a helicopter. And only one helicopter lands. And the guy who gets out of the helicopter is the most dumbest, stupidest guy in the class 20 years ago. But he's the only guy who comes in a helicopter. So he goes up to the podium because he's giving the address. He's addressing the students of Harvard. And he says that I should not be here because I was the most stupidest kid in class. And here I am trying to address this very august gathering. So I feel out of place. So the dean of the institute stepped up to the podium and said, I need to say a few words. And he says that we have done an analysis of all the students who passed out of Harvard over the years. And what we have concluded is this. Strange as may sound, A grade students end up working for B grade students in companies owned by C grade students. So you don't have to feel bad. We are happy that you are here. So the point is, why do C grade students succeed? And what drives them forward? It has been much debated what drives a C grade student to success. I have debated it in my own mind, and I feel that the single most ingredient that a C grade student has, which makes him succeed, perhaps, is two things. One is they work damned hard. But beyond that, because lots of people work hard, is that they're dreamers. And the most interesting thing is that today we are now in the dream society. We call this the dream society. It's the end of the information age. Information age has gone over. Now we are in the age of imagination. So there comes in the dreamer. So if you have the imagination, if you dare to dream, as said by APJ Abdul Kalam, the President of India, you can get places. Dare to dream, dare to imagine, and learn to manage failure. Just two things APJ Abdul Kalam said. If you can do these two things, you can succeed. So now we are in the dream society age, information age is over. So the guys who can think, because thought is the most powerful tool that you will have ever at your disposal. You can do anything you want. About 42 years ago, 1977, I was in Calcutta, having passed out recently from my school, Lawrence School, Sanaa, where I was a very average student, both academically as well as in sports. So I was in Calcutta. I had a whale of a good time. I was in the St. Xavier's College, Calcutta. I was doing political science. I chose political science because it was the easiest subject to do. It was a no-brainer. I did it quite well. But I was undecided what to do because I was not really qualified to do anything. I didn't have any professional degree. I didn't have any professional qualification to do any job. And I couldn't get any job. I mean, I thought I might get a job for about, that time the going rate was 1,000 rupees or maybe 1,500 rupees a month. So I said, this is not going to get me anywhere. And I came across a family friend, and he told me that, Sanjeev, what are you doing here? You're wasting your time. So I said, what should I do? He says, well, I would suggest that you, as a young man, should go abroad and work. I said, where should I go? He said, go to Iran. I said, Iran, where's that? He said, oh, I knew it was somewhere in the Middle East, but beyond that, I really didn't know anything. So I said, what am I going to do there? He said, I have friends there, and you go and work there, you go and work your butt off, and you'll enjoy yourself. So I said, but that's all very well, but what am I going to do? So he says, my company exports bicycles from Calcutta, and my dealer in Tehran, I'll talk to him and he'll employ you. So I said, really? Is that simple? He said, yes. So about 10 days later, I went there and he said, I've spoken to that guy and he said he'll employ you. So all you got to do is arrive at the airport, he'll pick you up, he'll employ you, give you some work. So I said, what am I expected to do? He says, well, you can go to the desert and sell bicycles. So I said, selling bicycles in the desert? He says, yeah, it's a virgin territory, you go and do it. The girls are very beautiful and you'll make a lot of money and you're young and you can do this and you can do that. So I was totally enthused. I said, instead of rotting in Calcutta doing nothing, might as well go to Iran. So I went to my mother, who's sitting right here, and I told her, can you give me some money? I want to go to Iran. So she said, she didn't say anything, but I thought she thought I was totally daft. Gave me 8,000 rupees. I bought a ticket for Iran and I arrived there. And this gentleman from Calcutta who had told me all about Iran happened to be on the same plane with me because he was going on a business trip. So I was very thankful that he was there. We arrived in Tehran. I had $300 US dollars in my pocket. That's all I had. We were met at the airport by this gentleman, a Sardarji, Sikh gentleman. And here I was told that he would pick me up, take me to his house and put me to work. He picked me up all right in his car. He had a Mercedes car, white Mercedes. And I was taken to a hotel and he says, you're going to stay here? So I said, I'm going to stay here. He says, yes. So I said, what am I going to do for? He said, we'll sort that out later. Go and rest. So I said, okay. Now, the hotel was maybe about $50. And it was evening, 6:30. Now, my first meal abroad was in a Korean restaurant. It was a Korean restaurant on the basement. $35. $85 wiped out in the first evening. I was down to about $215. I didn't know what to do. There was no visible sign of this guy coming back and offering me a job, taking me to his house, nothing of the kind. So I immediately contacted the reception and I went out of there and I checked into a student hostel, men's student hostel. There were 6 people in one room. None of them spoke English. I was the only person who spoke English. All of them were from India. Some were drivers, some were crane operators, 2 guys were looking for a job, but none of them could speak English. And I thought to myself, where the hell have I arrived? Yesterday, I was in the lap of luxury in Calcutta. I was living in an apartment, we had booze and we had food and I had one guy working for me, and here I was, 6 people in a room. I was on the top bunk of a bed. Didn't know what the hell had happened to me. I didn't know what had hit me, as if a train had hit me. That also voluntarily, because that's what I chose. And there's nothing I could do about it. I decided to come back to India, because that's one option I had. And we were sitting in this restaurant. I had the flight to catch at 6:30 in the evening. This gentleman, Mr. Bose, who was with me, was also going back to Calcutta. So I thought I'll sneak through the back door and pretend nothing had happened. But I didn't want to do that. I said, if I go back, then everyone will call me a loser. See what I told you? You had no business to be doing that. We were having lunch. And someone told me that the Maharaja of Patiala is sitting right there. My ears perked up. I said, really? Now I didn't know this guy, but I knew he knew of the family. I knew that he was a lieutenant in the army when my father was a major. So I knew that there was some connection. So I walked up to him and I said in proper English that I would like to talk to you. So he says, yes, what about? So I said, my name is so-and-so and I'm related to so-and-so, and you knew my father in the army. And he said, who was your father? So I said, my father's name. He said, yes, I knew him. So he said, what are you doing here? So I said, I'm looking for a job. So he was so surprised. He says, you're looking for a job? So I said, yeah. And there was another Sardar gentleman having lunch with him. So he introduced me to him. He said, can you get this guy a job? So the guy said, I will see. Come and meet me 2 days later. I mean, the Maharaja of Patiala, who's now the Chief Minister of Punjab, tells me, come and have a drink with me this evening. Now that evening, I was supposed to be in the aeroplane back, BOAC. That time they had BOAC back to Delhi. So I had the choice of either going back to Delhi or having a drink with His Highness Patiala in the Hilton Hotel. I chose to have a drink at the Hilton Hotel. I went there and that kept me back from returning to India. I stuck it out. For 2 months, 3 months, I just did what I had to, eating 1 meal a day. It was really horrible. It was the pits. It was terrible. But 2 months later, I managed to get a job. And every interview I went to, people asked me, what past experience do you have? I said, none. You got no experience? You want to have a job? Can you type? I said, no. Can you send a telex? No. Because in those days there were telex, there was no fax. So the only skill I had was to drive a car. I had no other skill. I mean, coming from my background, going through Lawrence School, Sana, coming through Davis College, and all, the only skill you have is to drive a bloody car. I didn't want to become a driver. So the next thing I did was, the next interview I went, do you have experience? Yes, sir. Where do you work? I worked in Calcutta. What did you do in Calcutta? I was working in an export-import company. So you have to learn to calibrate your answer because people like to hear what they want to hear. So if they want to hear you got experience, 1 check mark. The guy who was interviewing me was an Indian. Which company did you work in? I said, in Calcutta. What were you doing? I was exporting. What were you exporting? Coir mats. Because I had a friend of mine who was in the coir business. So I knew a little bit of the coir mats. Where were you selling them to? Germany. What was your job? Oh, running around, getting the shipment through, packing, going to the bank. I see. I've never heard of that company. So I said, well, neither did I till about 2 years ago. So he says, okay. I got the job. The point is that you've got to stick it out. If you don't stick it out, you're not going to get anything. And that's what it taught me a very valuable lesson that, it is only in the mind. I only had 2 things going for me. One was the thought that I needed to stay. I had no other options. And I worked and I just looked at what I had. I didn't look at what I didn't have. I looked at what I could speak English. I was reasonably smart. I could think on my feet. And I could, get on the better side of my boss if I wanted to. That worked. So it was a invaluable lesson that if it's all in the mind, what you think is what you get. What I felt was that what stood me singularly, perhaps, that helped me, was the discipline, sense of discipline and purpose that I had inculcated when I was in Sana. Because that made me, discipline makes you do things in a certain way. It makes you go on time, it makes you do things correctly, it makes you wake up on time, and that sense of discipline, I think, is the single most facet in my character that has stood me right through. And that was only through my experiences in Sana. Now, interestingly, most motivational speakers will tell you that in order to succeed, you need a few ingredients in life. One of them is, I'm talking of celebrated speakers, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, we're talking of Bollywood speakers, we're talking of Hollywood speakers, we're talking of people in business, who says that in order to succeed, you must have a vision. Vision. You must know what you want. You must know where you come from. If you know where you come from, you can go somewhere. I remember your parents, your peers, your teachers tell you, if you do not know where you are coming from, you cannot get anywhere. You must have a sense of belief in yourself, and you must have a passion. If you have a passion, then you can do anything. The point is that when I was in school and college, I had none of these things. I had no vision. I did not know where the hell I was coming from, and therefore I did not know where I was going. I had no self-belief in myself, because everywhere you go, you're told you're stupid, you're this, you're an idiot, you don't know how to do anything. So there's no question of self-belief, and there was certainly no passion. So in spite of all these things, how do you succeed? And if all these facets, the biggest thing which is going to pull you down is negativity. If someone tells you you're useless, you can't do this, you can't do that, your parents will tell you, your peers will tell you, your family will tell you, that gets into your psyche, that I am useless. So this question of fighting the negativity is the most important thing which I have encountered, which I perhaps found when I was in Iran, which translated itself there. Some 40 years later, I wrote a book published last year, called Rubies in My Ears. And that was encapsulation of my complete life, what I've done, and how I got there. And what I found was that thought matters, and it matters to a very, very high degree. And how are you going to handle that negativity? How are you going to handle that years of being told that you're useless, or you're this, or you're that? So, and I learned that in Iran, the only way you can handle negativity is by looking in the present, being in the present and handling the issues at hand. Concentrate on what you have, do not concentrate on what you don't have. That allowed me to see me through. People say be in the present, be aware. What the hell is being in the present? What the hell is being aware? It is simply by looking at what you have on the plate and eating what you have on the plate, and forget about dreaming of what you do not have, and that will get you places. Another way of cutting down negativity, which I feel is very important, is adopting an attitude which is called gratitude is attitude. Gratitude is attitude, meaning be very thankful for what you have. Forget what you don't have. And one of the ways is that when we walk into a restaurant, very often we find a very sullen waiter or waitress who is very upset with life, and they are very rude, and they come and throw a plate plate on the table, and they are very, very sullen. They're looking at the time. I need to go back at 5 o'clock, and so what do you do with a sullen waiter? One way to handle the sullen waiter is, as soon as you walk into the restaurant, pull out 50 rupees or 100 rupees and say, this is your tip, even before you ordered anything. So that guy is going to say, why are you giving me the money? That's your tip. What will that do? That will remove his sullen smile and put a smile on his face. If he goes into the kitchen, you're the only guy who's going to be given a plate of food with a smile from there on. So basically, that's just turning the entire thing on its head. Gratitude is attitude, by being very, very thankful for what you have, and never try to be the sullen waiter, because not only the waiter sullen, but no one likes that sullenness. That waiter is going to not make it in life, guaranteed. He is going to remain a waiter for the rest of his life. And that's unfortunate part, because people think that I've got a job, I've got to start at 10 o'clock in the morning, I've got to finish at 5 o'clock in the evening, and I don't care, I just need to finish that job. But you're not finishing that job well, you're not getting noticed, you're not getting picked up. If the guy is good, he'll get picked up, guaranteed. So, gratitude is attitude. Do not ever be the sullen waiter. Working hard is the single ingredient that everyone will tell you. You have to work hard. You have to work harder than anyone else. You got to wake up in the morning before else other people do. You got to go to sleep later. Comfort is not an option. That's what I found in Iran. And the three other facets that you will have to take you through, drive you through life: communication, expression, and thought. These three things, if you can communicate, if you can express yourself, and if you can think, it will drive you right to the top. There's absolutely no question about it. Arnold Schwarzenegger has said, just remember, you cannot climb the ladder of success with your hands in your pocket. You can't do that. If you want to climb the ladder of success, you got to be gritty, you got to have determination, and you got to work for it. If you do, you will get there. Other than looking at things with awareness, as I've said, and being observant and processing things as they happen, exactly as they happen, would also be very good. Another thing that I have to say is that, as I've said earlier, nothing in this world has happened without a thought. This building, including me, happened with a thought. That thought progressed to someone thinking about something which was subsequently converted into a material item, which, like an automobile. 100 years ago, someone thought of a car. That became a car in which we drive today, which we take for so granted. So, in other words, if there are 6 words, if you take these 6 words, you can achieve anything in life. You think what you become what you think about. Just 6 words. You become what you think about. So if you constantly think that I'm going to get there, I'm going to be successful, I'm going to be successful, I'm going to be successful, you will be. On the converse, if you think that I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it, you certainly are not going to make it. You become what you think about. Also, I have learned that you must take opportunities. Opportunities are there all the time. I took lots of opportunities. There's not a single person who does not have opportunities. And if you are aware and if you're looking at things as they should be, you will uncover opportunities. There's one of my favorite people I refer to all the time, the guy called Jack Ma. He's a Chinese, the richest man in China. He started that company called Alibaba, which is like Amazon, or it is like Flipkart. He started life in a small rural town in China. He was totally broke. He had nothing. He couldn't speak English. He was zero in studies. He never passed any school, college, nothing. And he just had the desire of wanting to do something. Everywhere he went, he was rejected. And he knew that in order to succeed, he needed to learn English. How the hell do you learn English? You're in some small town in China. And there used to be lots of visitors who would come to that town, tourists. So he became a tourist guide. And he went to the tourists, basically Europeans, Britishers, Americans, and he told them that I'll take you around and I will not charge any money. All you do is teach me 10 minutes of English. And he started learning English. In 95, he went to America. The internet had just started. And he thought that if I can pick up internet and promote the Chinese businesses, small businesses, who do not have the wherewithal to get internet themselves and promote themselves abroad, I will do this. And he created Alibaba. Today he is worth something like $38 billion. He's the richest man in China. And he says that there's no option to working hard. If today is hard, tomorrow will be harder, tomorrow will be worse, but day after will be good. So you got to stick it through. If you don't stick it through, if you don't stay the course, nothing is going to happen. And Jack Ma has also said, where no one sees the opportunities are the real opportunities. I remember reading about a photographer, and he was not a photographer, he was something else, and he decided to do photography, and he became a very famous photographer. So we would ask him, how did you become a photographer? I mean, what did you do differently? He said, well, I would go with these people and there would be about 10 people taking photographs. So wherever they were running that way, I would run that way. So everyone's taking photographs from this angle, I'm taking it from that angle. And that's what made my photography a little different. And that's what picked me up. So you got to do things differently. Do not let the negativity, because negativity is such an important thing, it has been in my life and everything I've encountered, do not let it demoralize you. Because if you let negativity demoralize you, you had it. Just take it as an event. Someone curses you, someone says something, just say, take it, and just move on. Don't even listen to them. But if you let it demoralize you, you had it. Because if you let it demoralize you, then it's going to get into your psyche, and then it's going to get into depression, and that's bad. Because if it gets into depression, then it's depressive rumination, and it can get you very, very bad. So don't, just listen to them, and through one ear out the other, and forget about it. I was writing my notes yesterday. Was it? Yeah, yesterday. And it occurred to me that, suddenly it occurred to me that there is a very great similarity between being egotistical and being depressive. And when I was writing it, I turned them first cousins. Ego and depression are first cousins. How is that? It's all about the thought. Someone tells you that you're great, you are fabulous, you're beautiful, you do this, you become egotistical. And it goes into your head. You become haughty, you don't listen because you think you're the best. And you are. I mean, beautiful women are, a lot of beautiful women are very egotistical, they're very haughty. But what does that lead to them? That leads to them being very lonely. You approach them, they cut you off, they bite your head off. But what does that do? Eventually, they become lonely. They're sitting in the glass house, and being egotistical leads them to depression. The singular point was Marilyn Monroe. And there are umpteen examples like that. So there we go. Egotistical and depression, a very thin dividing line, as is love and hate, very thin dividing line. So you've got to be careful. Don't believe it. Look at it and move on. Don't believe it. In everything that I have done, it's always been about the journey, trying to do any job, trying to do any in any business. In Goa, I have sold a few houses, I built a few houses, and it's always been part of the journey. Building the house is the singular most satisfying job you can do. Selling it is just an event. It really doesn't matter. It's building it which is important. That's the journey. In journey in life is the singular most important thing. So concentrate on the journey. Forget the actual end event. If you talk to any super athlete, it is all about practice, 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 practice. They get up at 4:30 in the morning and they go to sleep at 9:30 at night, and the next day again it starts again. It's practice, 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 practice. They never concentrate on the race. They never concentrate on the event, because they know that if they practice hard enough, the race will happen, they will win the medal. But they also know that if you do not practice hard enough, you're certainly not going to come anywhere near the medal. So it's all about the journey, it's all about the practice. And it's the relationship you have to practice. Everyone works hard, but it's the relationship that you put to that and what you do that comes out. So if you put your mind to it and your soul, it will succeed. There's another thing that I found is that sometimes people are upset about something and you don't know what to do and you're spinning. My job is not going life, my love life is bad, my house life is bad, everything is bad, I've got no money. The one way to get out of that is that, you'll always, if you look around, you'll probably always find someone worse off than you. At every point, there's always someone worse off than you. Go and help them. If it means rolling down your window and giving someone 10 rupees in the outside. What that will do is that will bring a smile to that guy's face. That smile should energize you because you've uplifted someone else. There's nothing better than uplifting anyone. If you uplift someone else, that's going to uplift you. The more you give, the more you're going to get back in life. It is the unwritten rule. The more you give, the more you're going to get back in life. That is the law of nature. You cannot change that. The more you give, the more you're going to get back. And the beautiful thing here is that everything happens in its own time, everything happens in its own speed. Sometimes we say that we were in school together, that guy has become a director of this company, that guy has become what he's become, that guy has become a business magnate or a captain of the ship, or he's become a brigadier, but I've done the same education, but I got left behind. So there's no point comparing. There's no point comparing apples with apples. That guy's in his own place, you're in your own place. Some people succeed early, some people succeed late. Some flowers grow in the sun, some flourish in the shade, some flourish in the desert, cactuses. Typically the people who succeed early also, by the time they're 60 they're done, 65 they're done. People who flourish in their midlife, 45, 50, tend to be working when they're about 75. That's the law of nature. There's nothing you can do about it. Warren Buffett, who is considered by many to be the world's largest, single most successful investor, has said that if you become emotional at anything that is said to you, then you had it. So if anyone says any words to you, do not get emotional. Just sit back, take a deep breath, look at things with logic. Is he saying the right thing or is he saying the wrong thing? Because if someone's words can move you, then be sure that everyone will be spinning you around like a little top in your fingers. Do not let words disrupt your mind. Do not get emotional. Take a deep breath, sit back, let the moment pass. Everything changes. Good things will change, bad things will also change. So this is a fabulous advice coming from Warren Buffett. Do not let anyone's words impact you. To always do the right thing, go for excellence. Because if you shoot for excellence, even when I was in school, I used to remember telling people, shoot for the moon. If you shoot for the moon, you might land on Earth. But if you shoot for the Earth, you're not going to get anywhere. Always go for excellence. And if you shoot for excellence, you will land somewhere. There is absolutely no doubt. Many people think that what is luck? Where does luck play out in my life? Well, I will tell you this, luck is not genetic. If your father was lucky, does not mean that you're going to be lucky. No way. Luck is not genetic. If you work at it hard enough, you will not get lucky, luck will get you. Let me repeat this. If you work hard enough, you will not get lucky, luck will get you. You will not follow your dreams will follow you. In my life, I've done something like 6 or 8 different careers. So it's not that I became passionate about something and it started following me. No. Once you reach that, once you reach a certain level, passion will ignite within inside you. And that passion will follow you in whatever you do. Even if you're making a safety pin, even a boring thing like a safety pin or an office clip, if you work at it hard enough, passion will follow you and you will create something beautiful. I remember going to Pune many, many years ago, and I had gone to the Osho ashram. Friends of mine were in the Osho ashram, and I thought that was a bit of a joke that time. And they used to tell me that Osho has various forms of meditation. One is vegetable cutting meditation. So I said, what the hell is vegetable cutting meditation? All it is looking at cutting vegetables with a sense of awareness, so that you can cut, or onions. I cut one onion and I start getting teary. But So there you go. So awareness is just looking at things as they are, observe them as they are. So if you have to do a jhadu nicely. If you're doing a waiter's job, do it brilliantly. Because if you do, you will get noticed. If you just take the jhadu and put the dirt underneath the carpet, you will get away. You'll go home, you'll get your salary, but you're not going to go anywhere in life. You have to do things well, do them with a sense of excellence. And you must forget the past. Here I am going to say that we have got the past, present, future. You cannot change the past, so just forget it. Just forget it as an event which happened and it's over. Forget it, lock it up in the trunk. Concentrate on the present, because if the present is good, your tomorrow will be good. So just handle the present. Don't even talk about the future. No one has known the future. No, we don't know the future. The future is in your hands. Ever since we are grown up, we are told karma. Karma will do this, luck will do that. Karma is equivalent to work. Karma equals work. You kids are here, I will tell you this. Karma is work. So if you study hard, you will get a good degree. If you do not study hard, you will not get a good degree. It's as simple as that. You may be brilliant, you may pass, but if you study harder, you will do better. So karma equal work. So it is, destiny is in your hands. If you don't want to work, you're not going to get. So forget someone telling you you got luck quotient, you got karma hanging on you. No, just hang on in the moment, today. If today is good, tomorrow will be even better. There was another very successful person I always refer to in my mind and talks is Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders was rejected something like 109 times, I'm told, 109 times, 1009. And everything he did, he was rejected. So eventually, in his mid-60s, he only had one thing left, and he thought, I'll try that. And that was, he had a recipe for making fried chicken. He did that, he was very successful, and today has the KFC chain behind him. So Colonel Sanders said that he only has 2 pointers in life. You only got to do two things. Do whatever you can and do all you can. Nothing else. If you do these 2 things, you will get there. Leave no stone unturned. Do whatever you can, do all you can. And he says, I followed that principle forever from day one and I have succeeded. I fully endorse that. We have this example of Mr. Steve Jobs. I assume everyone knows who Steve Jobs is. Now, Steve Jobs would lead every presentation, Apple presentation. He would lead it himself. He would be wearing blue jeans and he would be wearing a black polo roll-up pullover. Every year, he would do all his product launches and he would lead everyone into frenzy. Such a frenzy that people would line up outside his Apple stores the whole night in freezing weather to be the first in line to buy the product. What was Steve Jobs doing? All Steve Jobs was doing was inspiring people. He was inspiring them. And let me tell you this, if you inspire anyone, they will buy anything from you. If you inspire anyone, you will buy anything from you. Steve Jobs had built this frenzy. I mean, he was inspiration par excellence. That's it. Inspire. If you can inspire anyone, they will do anything for you. It's a very, very powerful thing. Finally, I mean, when I was to wrap up, not wrapping up. Robin Williams, the actor, has said that words and ideas can change the world, which is very true. Words and ideas do change the world. You know, strangely enough, success, in other words, is nothing other than achieving your goals. Success is nothing other than achieving your goals, whether it is your daily goals, your monthly goals, your yearly goals. And the irony here is that most people achieve their daily goals. Every day you have goals. One of your goals is to come to this talk today. Most people achieve 90 to 95% of their daily goals every day. They fret over the balance 5% of the goals which they have not achieved. But normal goals are every day you get up, these are the things I'm going to do, you do it. You routinely do it. So what are you going to do? You've got to stretch your imagination a little bit. Stretch outside and stretch your goals slightly higher and higher and higher and higher. And when you start doing that, you'll start achieving those also. So if you stretch even here and you start achieving even 90% of here, you will find that your bandwidth is increasing. Do that. It's free. Interestingly, anything we buy, generally, we do not buy what you do, we buy why you do it. Let me repeat this. We do not buy what you do, we buy why you do it. And Steve Jobs is again here the inspiration. He had built up this super story. So people bought Apple why he did it. So if you can build that storyline, we do not buy what you do, we buy why you do it. It's fantastic. It'll make the whole thing change. There are, in my opinion, other than what I've already said, 5 ways, 5 steps to success. And one of those steps is, do not blame others. We all say that I can't succeed because my parents forced me into becoming an engineer, or my father pushed me into becoming a doctor, or my father did this, or my father did that. I mean, forget it. Now the date for the use by date for blaming your parents and your friends is over. Blame yourself. Do not blame others. Do not resist change. By resisting change, you are closing the avenues of opportunities and success that you have. In business, the people who lost out by resisting change were companies such as big companies, Nokia from 90% to 0, Kodak 90% to 0, Motorola 90% to 0. Why? Because they did not adopt change. Along came Samsung and wiped them all out. I think in India the biggest clock maker in the world is a company called Ajanta Clocks. Today, who is the biggest clock maker? Samsung. All mobile phones have a timer. Nokia got wiped out. They're crawling back, but they were not able to move with the change. They stopped the change. Do not fear fear. Do not fear fear. Because when we are trying to do something, we are fearful. We are imagining what will happen if I do this. We are trying to project ourselves into the future. Don't fear fear. Look at the present. If you look at the present, things will materialize. Tomorrow will happen, but do not fear fear. And when should I do it? Everyone is trying to time the market. Should I do this now? Should I do it? Forget it. If you want to do it, do it. Just follow Nike. Just go and do it. As the Nike logo is, just do it. So these are the 5 steps. If you follow these 5 steps religiously, you will get there. There is a, coming down to leadership, leadership and motivational are also very, very closely linked. There is a interesting thing here. There's something called extravagant sacrificial service. Extravagant sacrificial service, which means, simply put, working well and in an area, working well beyond the call of duty, trying to do something way beyond what you are asked to do in a job. There's a story behind this. In the 1890s, it was in Philadelphia, it was in the winter, it was very, very cold, and there was a hotel there called the Bellevue Hotel. And it was late at night, and an old man and his elderly wife walked in wanting a room in the winter night. And the guy on duty said that there's no room. So they say, so he looked at them and he said, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and he said that, I can't let you people go away without a room. So why don't you do one thing? Why don't you, I'll give you my room to sleep in. And that guy says, listen, you can't give me your room. He said, no. It's very cold outside. I'll manage somehow or the other. So he went to his wife and told them that you got this couple outside and they need a room. So the husband and wife made a space for them, and they moved out of their apartment and they gave their room to this elderly gentleman. The next day, they checked out, and he was very grateful. And this is, why did you do this? No, I had to do it because it was late at night. Where are you going to go? 2 years went by. So that guy told him, he says, I must do something for you. I must do, you went out of your way, I have to do something for you. And one day I'm going to build something for you. So that guy says, this guy's talking, we don't know what he's talking about. 2 years go by, he sends him a letter and he says, you remember 2 years ago we met, and this is a ticket to New York, please come and meet me. So this guy arrives in New York, and the guy takes him for a walk and he says, do you see this building? So he says, yes. He says, I built this building for you. I want you to manage my hotel. So he says, what are you talking about? Are you serious? He said, yes. That chap, his name was William Waldorf Astor. He went on to make the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The manager in the Pennsylvania Hotel, Philadelphia Hotel, was a guy called George C. Bolt, who ended up becoming the first manager of the Waldorf Astoria. This has now become called the Waldorf principle, which is working well beyond the call of duty. It's called the extravagant sacrificial service. Michael Eisner, who ended up being the chief CEO of Disney when Disney was in the dumps, and he brought Disney to super heights. One of Michael Eisner's job description was picking up trash. Picking up trash. That was his job description. One of his job descriptions. He would go around in Disney theme park picking up his own trash. So, later on this has been, we've got people like the Prime Minister of India when he goes on a Swachh Bharat and picks up a jhadu or a broom and starts sweeping. So you get all the mantris also running around with the jhadu in their hands, or a general in the army going to sweep the toilets of a barrack. Then everyone does it. So that's one way of doing it. It's of getting people to religiously follow you. It's extravagant sacrificial service. It will never be. It will always be noticed. So no matter who you are, even if you are a attendant, even if you're cutting vegetables, or you're a waiter in a restaurant, if you do that, you will be noticed. That guy did. He became the general manager of Waldorf Astoria. And these cases are not alone, they are not singular. It happens all the time. They say that real influence, when we were in school, definitely in Sanar, real influence came by shoving some information down someone's throat that I am the boss, you must follow me. But real influence comes by humbly serving people and telling them who's boss. So it is a different game to it. Even in leadership, leadership is a choice, it's not an authority, as we all know. Many people get appointed as a particular authoritative position as a manager or as a CEO or as a politician, but they have no draw card, they have no following. A leader has following. A leader is the guy who goes first. A leader is the guy who shows the way. A leader is the guy who mentors, who teaches. Without mentorship, we are not going anywhere. Typically in India, people don't mentor for various reasons, because they come from a different community, they are a different race, they're a different state, so we don't mentor. We don't mentor because we are insecure. If I mentor you in my position, you'll take my job. But mentorship is the most primary important thing that you can ever do. And all you got to do is keep ahead of the curve. By keeping ahead of the curve, no one can catch up with you. No one can catch up with you. In 21 years ago, 1998, I was in New Zealand and I was heading a software company. And I was very fortunate to end up getting two very primary contracts. One was with Reliance and one was with Tata Motors to do the SAP implementation. I mean, it was something which I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And I remember Reliance telling me this, that Sanjeev, we are going to employ you for 6 months. So I said 6 months. Now I had brought in a dream team of consultants from Scotland, and they're from America, United States of America, they're from Europe, England, Australia. So I said, how do I get these guys only for 6 months? They said, well, you know, Reliance has this capacity of, we do reverse engineering. So I said, what do you, I mean, how do you reverse engineer a brain? So he says, well, you bring your guys here, and we have this philosophy on lao, nichodo or pheko, so we'll suck their brains dry, we'll understand whatever there is to understand from them in 6 months and go and do it ourselves. So I said, really? He said, yes. So, and so even if you bring a teacher, you come and teach us. But in 6 months, we will get so many people taught by them that we will not need you anymore. You would have trained our 100 trainers or trained the trainer, so we don't need you anymore. So I said, oh my God. So, all my work is going to finish in 6 months. And guess what? When 6 months arrived, we were on the next base. So they said, listen, we still need to catch up with you. So I said, fine. 6 months later, we were 6 months ahead. So every time they came to catch up, we were one notch ahead. So it was almost like going from A to B to C to D. When it came to Z, we were on A plus, back to A plus. And this things continued, because all we did was to stay ahead of the curve. It's called staying ahead of the curve. Don't allow anyone else to catch up. A contract which should have lasted 6 months lasted, I think, from 98 till 2004, when Mukesh Ambani and Anil Ambani split. Because I was working for Mukesh at that time. When they split, we split. But the point is that by staying ahead of the curve, they could not catch up. It was phenomenal. So mentorship, if you mentor anyone and you stay ahead of the curve, no matter what information you give that guy, you are still way ahead in anything you do. And so leaders have to communicate, they have to express, they have to practically demonstrate what leaders do. And so mentorship is very, very important, which I have felt that we don't do, because way back in New Zealand, I'll give you a story. I think it was about 97 or 98, 6 years, 7 years into my stay in the country, and I'd gone for Diwali. It was Diwali evening in the Mahatma Gandhi Center. Every country in the world has a Mahatma Gandhi Center. So I went there, and there was one Kiwi politician who had come, and they were taking him around for Diwali. Everyone was wearing kurta pajama and all that. I was the only guy wearing a shirt. And so during the event, some guy came out with a Kiwi guy, said, sir, you must come with us to our Punjabi association. Sir, you must come with us to our Gujarati association, to our Telugu association, to our Andhra association. So this guy is standing next to me and he is saying that, can I ask you a question? I said, yes. He said, don't you have an Indian association? I said, there's an Indian association. No, but then what is Punjabi, what is Telugu, what is Karnataka, what is Gujarati? I said, those are they're all different states. But that led me to believe that we have nothing known as Indian. There is no Indian association. There were 16 state associations in a tiny country like New Zealand. New Zealand has a population of 4 million people. We got 16 state associations in India, including Goa, which had a membership of 16 people. There were 2 from Bandra, 1 from Andhra, 1 from Bangalore, Chennai. I mean, the list went on. It was totally crazy. But so there we have this upheaval. 2 people don't want to talk to each other. So there's no question of mentorship, but leader mentors. There's a very interesting example here of soldiers going to war, and it's a hard battle, and it's a battle for death perhaps, and the soldiers go up to the commanding officer and ask him, sir, what are we fighting for? So commanding officer says, could you please explain to me what your question is? He says, yes sir, what are we fighting for? Are we fighting for our country? Are we fighting for a flag? Are we fighting for a prime minister? What the hell are we fighting for? Because none of us know what we are fighting for. We are told to go to war. We are willing to go to war. We are willing to lay down our life. We probably end up will, because we are boxed in from here, we are boxed in from there, we are boxed in from here. But when we go to war, what are we fighting for? Could you please tell us? Am I fighting for my wife? Am I fighting for my children? What the hell am I fighting for? Am I fighting for my wife, my parents? So the commanding officer says, no, you're not fighting for any of these things. Forget everything. What about the national flag? What about the tricolor? No, forget that. You're not fighting for the flag, you're not fighting for Mr. Modi, you're not fighting for India. You are only fighting for the man on your shoulder. Protect the man on your shoulder. If you protect the man on your shoulder, he will protect the man on his shoulder. And so on and so forth. And you will come out as a singular fighting unit. If there's any chance of you coming out alive, you guys will come out alive. Because you are protecting each other. Do not say, I'm going to protect you because you're a Gujarati or I'm an Indian or a Punjabi. Be cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is going to get you places. Being singular is not going to get you any places. It's a very, very powerful tool. It's the powerful in business and powerful in leaders, that if you are cohesive. In India, unfortunately, we don't have that, and that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that if you can inculcate that within you, in any company, in anywhere you go, mentorship is one. Steve Jobs had 11 mentors. 11 mentors. It's not that they knew where they're going, no. None of them knew. Even Steve Jobs himself did not know where he was going. But with those 11 mentors, he created something so spectacular. He took that company to $1 trillion American dollars. That's more economy than perhaps the whole of Europe put together. I mean, you could think about it. 11 mentors, and he produced that. So mentorship is something that has to be done. Unfortunately, we don't follow it, but that should be. So a true leader is very generous with his time. So if any student, kid come and asks you, be generous with your time. I'm talking of generosity in your time, in your what you teach them, what you inculcate to them. Generosity does not mean only pulling out money and buying him a gulab jamun. No, it is being generous with training that person. And if you're generous with that, that is what is going to keep you singularly apart from everyone else. I think Martin Luther King Jr. had said, either we live like brothers or perish as fools. Very true. Finally, lastly, I recently came upon an article written by Lord Jeffrey Archer, the writer, and he was in India recently and he was being interviewed. And they asked Lord Jeffrey Archer. Now, Jeffrey Archer has written multiple bestsellers. There's not a single book he's written which has not been a bestseller. He started writing 40 odd years ago. The first book he wrote was Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. And then the most famous book was Cain and Abel, which was written 40 years ago. I don't know, have you ever read Jeffrey Archer? Any of you? No one? So they asked Jeffrey Archer, said, as a writer, 40 years later, does writing become easy? And I've got to tell you that when I wrote a book a year ago, it was very difficult. It was not easy. I mean, everyone thinks it's easy, but it's actually very difficult. Publishing especially. So they asked Jeffrey Archer. So I thought I did not know what I was doing. So does writing become easy 40 years later? So he says, no, it does not become easy. Writing is hard work. There's a distinction between writing, please listen to this. There's a distinction between writing and there's a distinction between storytelling. Storytelling is a gift. Writing is easy. Anyone who knows English and who has a little bit of education, or Hindi, who has education depending on what language you're writing in, and has read books, can write. Anyone can do that. Storytelling is the art. Jeffrey Archer went on to say, he says, I get up at 5:30 every morning. I write for 2 hours. Then I take a 2-hour break. And I do this repeatedly till 9:30 at night when I go to sleep. Every day of the year I do that. I write 8 hours every day. And that's Jeffrey Archer saying this. And he's written multiple books. He's saying there is no escape from hard work. You got to write. But if you can tell stories and if you can get them to turn the pages, then you are on a winning roll. And that's what I'm going to end with, that if you are a storyteller, now's your time. Thank you. So I'll throw this over to questions. If anyone wishes to ask any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Mr. Rao, how important is an academic degree to achieve what you have done?
Hello. You need a little bit of basic academia. But yes, in my case, in Sanaa, it gave me a sense of discipline, which I said earlier was very, very important. I think discipline has played a very, very important part in my life. I'll give an example. In the mid-80s, no, in the 70s rather, in the 70s, when I was midway through college, I spent a lot of time in Ranchi, and I spent a lot of time with an uncle of mine who was in the army, ex-army. And he taught me how to drink, because he was a big drinker. But he also taught me about discipline. He says, he told me this, and I remember this, that you can drink as much as you like. I don't care. But always show up for breakfast. Never make drinking an excuse. Never allow that to make you miss a meeting. Never allow that to interfere in your job. No matter how much I've drunk, I have never missed a plane. I have never missed a meeting. I might arrive there smelling like a brewery, but I have always arrived. That's discipline. Next question. Anyone else? Yes? You want a mic?
Sir, how important is the absence of a skill, like you said, diving? I don't know diving, or not doing swimming. How that hampers in
Well, it'll only hamper it to the point you find a vision, I mean, within you. Let me repeat this. When I was in my teens or rather young in 20s in college, I had no vision. So you have to find that. Till you find your vision, you have to bide your time by doing whatever you're doing. No matter how small a job, bide your time doing whatever you're doing. That by being aware, by looking at things as they are, you will find your vision.
So you said you concentrate on what you have and forget what you don't.
Correct.
have.
Absolutely correct.
That is way of thinking positive.
Correct. Correct.
Do not think that you don't know driving or you don't know swimming. You see what your
No, because
what is your strengths. what your positive-
even the smallest job could get you noticed. Like working in a restaurant, if you're a smiling waiter, you will get noticed. Someone might want to open a restaurant in Bombay, they'll pick you up. And from Bombay, you could go to New York. Next.
Hi, sir. At one point you mentioned that we should start doing, and after working hard, we get passionate about it. This is something different from what we have been taught to believe. Like we have been always taught to believe that you do something which you are passionate of. You know, like for example, a hobby. You follow your hobby, and that's where you will enjoy. But there was a point you have mentioned that you do, and then you get passionate about it. So how do you? Is it possible with that? Like, if you are really not interested to do it, but once you start doing it and then later you get passionate about it, is it possible?
Well, that's the whole problem here, that you are following someone else's dogma, you are living someone else's life, because someone else has told you to do it, whether it's your parent or whether it's your family. So, it's very important to not listen to too many people. If you talk to 5 people, you're going to get 5 opinions. Which opinion are you going to carry through? It's also very important that you don't live other people's lives. I mean, in India, become an architect, become an engineer, it's a waste of time, because unless you want to do it. When you want to do something, that's where the passion is. Are you getting me? And it's also very important that you do not always listen to everyone, because there's some people in your family, in your peers maybe, who actually are in a totally different station of life. They are totally far removed from your life. So by listening to them becomes a waste of time. You have to listen to yourself. You have to first get down and decide what you want, decide what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and once you begin to realize that, as the gentleman on your left said, you will get passion. Passion will follow you. Do not follow your passion. Passion will follow you, no matter what job you do, small or big. That will happen.
I would like to know about physical fitness. How to train the mind through physical fitness. You can achieve money, everything, but keeping your body fit, achieve everything.
Well, I think the physical fitness is there, but it's a more, in order to succeed, you need, other than the basic physical fitness, you need mental agility. And again, that only comes through by looking at what you have and knuckling down, working hard. You got to work very, very hard, work harder than anyone else. And once things start fitting out, then everything else will start falling into place. So your physical fitness, unless you are unable to do something, but generally it's more getting the mind into order, forgetting negativity, getting out of negativity. Negativity is the biggest downside.
So one example of getting the mind.
Well, as I said, gratitude is attitude. By being very happy, by accepting what you, being very thankful for what you got. Everywhere you go, be thankful. Thank everyone for what you have. And slowly, almost like 1 percentage point at a time, cutting out the negativity. 1 percentage point per week. Just 1 percentage point per week. 10 weeks later, you cut out 10% of negativity. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. Try it.
It doesn't have anything to do with diet or something.
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. Unless that is affecting you, But no diet, it's all in the mind. Anything that you feel is going to, don't drink too much, but other than that, anything that's going to keep your mind together and is going to, anything that is going to inhibit you, stop you from working, don't do that. But it's the mind.
You mentioned about the discipline. The lady is asking the discipline about the food. It's not discipline.
No, it is. As I said, don't drink too much. I did say that. Or anything which is going to inhibit you, sir. So any food, if you're going to have chilies, which is going to inhibit you and you can't now work because you have to go to bed, then that's wrong.
Physical fitness, mental fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness interwoven, sir.
Yes, sir. As I said, emotionally, I gave you Warren Buffett's example. Do not get emotionally carried away with whatever people tell you. In this country of ours, everyone likes to tell you things and you get carried away. Do not get carried away. Just register their words. There's something called naysayers, people who are always pulling you down. Unfortunately, it's very, very unfortunate, but some of our best friends are pulling you down. There is something called jealousy. Even your best friends have jealousy. They tell you one thing, but they're actually thinking about something else. So you got to be damn careful. So, likewise with, you go to an uncle of yours, your uncle is a bloody hell. I worked my entire life and I am driving a Maruti and you are driving a Mercedes. Ye kaise aa gaya bhai? Now, but he does not realize that to get your Mercedes, you have had to work hard, very, very hard. I am saying luck is not genetic. You have not got it from your father. You worked at it. So there again, you got to be careful, in my view.
Hi.
Hi.
Sanjeev, first of all, it's wonderful to hear you speak, particularly since we were in the same class at school, and it's almost a coincidence that I'm very grateful that I'm here in Goa to hear you speak like this. To me, a couple of things stood out. One was, of course, this attitude of gratitude. The other thing is that you have tried many different things before you come to where you are, and you will probably continue to do that. So, do you think one of the ingredients of success or serenity or happiness or joy is the ability to take risks in some way and then and kind of enjoy what you're doing? I think that could be one of the main ingredients of why you are where you are right now.
Well, definitely, and I think taking risks is very important. If you're in business, you've got to take calculated risks. Now, some risks unfortunately don't happen. But if a risk turns out correct, because business is a risk, you got to take it. Opportunities are the risk, you got to take it. Mr. Richard Branson, who's the chairman of the Virgin Group of companies in England, said that don't fret, because everyone says, "Arey, I've lost my opportunity. I was given an opportunity 5 years ago to Dubai and I didn't take it. That's why I'm rotting in Nasik." Richard Branson said, opportunity is like a bus. If you miss one, forget it. Another one will be coming half an hour down the line. Jump into that one. So, do not blame others that I missed that opportunity. You must take opportunities. You must take calculated risks. And in answer to your direct question, I've done so many jobs. I was doing a different one in Iran, then I was doing a different one in Delhi. Then when I went to New Zealand, I started importing ladies' garments because my girlfriend at that time was a big time importer of ladies' garments. We started doing garment import, and I would fill up my car with ladies' garments and drive all over the country selling them. Then I said, bloody hell, I don't want to do this anymore. And I went into software. I knew nothing about software. I had no training, nothing. But I ended up managing a company. I ended up hiring people who were miles ahead of me. I mean, they had degrees longer than my arm. I mean, I was a good old BA, and these guys had degrees. And that got me to places. I managed to get the Reliance contract. I managed to get the Tata contract. I remember Dhirubhai Ambani saying that Dhirubhai was uneducated. He said, I always employ people more brilliant than me, and I leverage their brain and their mind to take me places. So yes, again coming back to your question, do not follow your passion, allow your passion to follow you. That will allow you to do multiple jobs at different times of your life, and both professionally and personally.
What are the greatest failures that you regret in your life?
Well, interesting question. But failure, if any, would be perhaps, I mean, I've had lots of relationships, maybe I'm not getting culminated in any one of them. I'm a bachelor today. But professionally, 10 years ago, I came to Goa from New Zealand. So and at that time I was pretty much in the peak of my career in my software business. I was doing SAP and I was consulting in Qatar. I've had companies in Qatar, in United States of America, New Zealand, Australia, England, Europe, Southeast Asia. So had I stayed there another 10 years, maybe I could have driven it to a higher degree. But at that time, it was not that important to me. I came here. I'm quite happy here. I built a few houses. I've sold a few houses. It's a different career altogether. It's been more of a challenge. Going to United States of America, getting a green card was not that much of a challenge to me. I got it, but I really didn't want it. And there again, there is the dichotomy. Often you get things you don't want. So it's a mindset. Yes, sir.
Sanjeev, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. I have a couple of questions. One is more on the lighter side. Could you share with us the story behind the red rubies in your ears?
Yep.
If you don't mind. And on a more serious note, could you share for the benefit of our youngsters who are sitting over here, the importance of continuously reinventing oneself as per the market environment or the changes happening around us? I would like to cite the instance of what's happening in Goa, for instance, the mining crisis. It's very easy today for the people who were employed in the mining industry to shift the blame onto other factors like the government or whatever. But none of them seem to be taking the onus upon themselves to reinvent themselves and find themselves new jobs, like what you did from ladies' garments to IT. So I think it's very important for us to all the time reinvent ourselves depending upon the market conditions or the environmental factors around us. So could you just throw some light on that? Thank you.
Well, coming back to your first question, Rubies in My Ears is the title of a book. When I wrote the book, the title that came to my mind at that time was The First Cut. And I mean, it's just something came to mind and I wrote it. And then when I gave the book to the publisher, we were wanting like a kind of a book cover. And the first cut didn't gel very much. And I was looking at what kind of cover we could get. And my girlfriend at that time, had decided that, I was wearing red rubies. So she says, why don't you write rubies in your ears? So I called the publisher, called the graphic artist, and I said, can you make something to this effect? So he said, let me see. So they played around with their imagery, and they came up with this, my facade, my profile with my ruby. So I said that ruby is representative of success. Ruby is a stone which it's an expensive stone, it's a precious stone, and you get it only after having been there, done that. I mean, they don't come cheap, and it was slightly unique, so we stuck with that. Now coming back to the professional question, I certainly believe that you need to roll with the punch. I've already said you stop blaming the use by time to blame Parekar and company is over. That's happened. It's over. It's digested. It's out of the system. You got to now look forward. And by rolling with the punch means that seeing what you have today, assessing do your pros and cons. On one side, write what I have. On one side, write what you don't have, what you desire, and stress on what you have. And that will lead you to some places, in my view. Also, very importantly, you got to decide in which category do you categorize yourself. Do you feel that you want to be a worker, or do you feel that you want to be a leader, or do you want to be a business magnate? Because there are three different distinctions here. If you want to be a leader, then that calls for more responsibility. A lot of people don't. They want to. They're quite happy to work under a managerial as a sub manager in a company and be a 9 to 5 operator. No problem. No problem. But at the end of the day, 30 years later, you're not going to be the one noticed. If you want to be noticed, then you got to be a leader, and you got to decide what you want. So that is your own personal capitulation on what you want. Do you want to be a 9 to 5 person, or you want to be a business? Do you want to be in politics? And you may not want any, you may not know. I did not know, as I said. But one way of deriving that knowledge is by working with what you have. And I keep coming back to deciding what you have. So do any job, be it from student to post-student days, do any job well. And slowly you'll start getting your vision. You'll start finding your passion. I don't know whether that answers the question, but I think it should.
Sir, you said you have taken up different careers over the years. So how far it is important to focus maybe on one thing and maybe then stop and take up something else? Like we always say that you need to focus on your work, right? So is it important to carry on with one thing only, or you can sometimes change and take up something else?
Well, direct answer to your question, I was in business, so I had various people working for me. But I will say, and I'll say this, that do not multitask. People always say multitask, but I would say do not multitask, because multitasking actually goes against the brain. Because you got to tutor your brain. If you're doing one job, then you got to come down and get into the other job, then your brain comes down and goes into the other job. So it's like a pendulum. Don't do that. Concentrate on one thing, and you will make it, depending on where you want to go. But success is not easy. You got to know. I mean, once you decide where you want to go, then you got to work at it and slowly inch your way there. To give you an example, you wanted an example. Arnold Schwarzenegger grew up in Austria, and his father was a mechanic or something. I mean, very, very low, and he was a wimp kid. He was nothing big, but he didn't. It was in post-war Germany, Austria, so it was very Germanic, and he had nothing going for him there. And in Austria at that time, they had nothing. They had nothing. He says you can play the sound of music, or you can go up the mountains, or you can play yodeling. That was or skiing. Those are the things they have in Austria. He didn't want to do any of that, and he didn't know what he wanted to do. So he goes into a bookstore, and he sees things about United States of America, big buildings, very, very something totally different to what he saw in Austria. So he said, I want to go to America. Great. What are you going to do there? So he sees a magazine of a bodybuilding magazine, of pictures of a guy called Reg Parks, who was the world champion of bodybuilding from England, Leeds, and he'd been world champion of bodybuilding for 5 years in a row. So this guy buys the magazine, takes it home, and he says bodybuilding could become a ticket to United States of America. So he starts building his body because he had nothing else to do, and he was a big guy, and he built his body, and he became world champion, goodness knows 9 times or something. He arrived in America, he got his citizenship there, and now what do we do? So you built your body, but what do you do from there? So he said, wanted to get into movies. So he went to the people in the movie business, and they said that we're not going to employ you because you look like you're looking like a hunk. I mean, who the hell is going to take you? And you can't even speak because you used to speak like a machine. And finally, he got his break in some movies, Conan the Barbarian, which made him a hero, and it became a blockbuster. And then he went on to make the Terminator series, where he speaks like a machine. I'll be back. And the director of that movie said that your voice, which spoke like a machine, is which made you different. So, but he had this vision, he wanted to go there, and he stuck at it. Steven Spielberg, the greatest producer and director of all time, was rejected by film school in America 3 times. After getting rejected 3 times, he goes on to become the biggest producer and director of all time. So these things happen. It's not an accident.
So thank you for all the questions. We know that you have had a lot of curiosity after the talk delivered by Mr. Sanjeev Lal. So, and also this is, as we mentioned in the beginning, he has focused the talk on personal experiences about his life, about how he overcame obstacles and adversity to achieve success. And we also mentioned at the beginning of the program that the book that he mentioned about, Rubies in My Ears, is available for display if you'd like to have a look at the copy. And also if anyone of you would like to purchase it, it is available at a discounted price of 400 rupees.